The presenting sponsor of the BloodStream podcast is Takeda. And for that we say, thanks, Takeda. Hello and welcome to the BloodStream podcast, episode 44, January 20th, 2020. That's a lot of 20s. I am Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
On this episode, safety concerns around gene therapy are rekindled as AAV integration is discovered in 6 out of 6 hemophiliac dogs. We'll discuss what it means and the article that reignited this concern in the comments segment. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled on Texas versus the United States in favor of striking the individual mandate and making vulnerable the ACA itself. We cover what it means in today's Like segment. And Kim Phelan, the Vice President of the Coalition for Hemophilia B, joins me for the interview segment to discuss mental illness in our community and the unfortunate passing of another young man with hemophilia. All of that, plus an introduction to BloodStream's latest team member, a tease of some new shows, and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to BloodStream.
So, something's been killing me for about a month now.
Oh my goodness, why are you just telling me?
Well, I told you earlier, but I wanted to tell our audience as well.
Okay, all right. This is the heads up.
We had parting shots last month, and we did our favorite Christmas movies.
We did.
And I have some amendments.
Oh,
So I said Charlie Brown Christmas.
You did.
I said It's a Wonderful Life.
Uh-huh.
And what was the third one I said?
I don't remember.
Well, I think I forgot about A Christmas Story, which I absolutely love.
Pretty sure you did.
And we watched.
We did.
And I forgot about Prancer.
You definitely did not mention Prancer.
And there's just so many good ones. And I think I felt rushed.
Okay.
And I just don't want people to think that those are my favorite when there's just like you said before, like my favorite soups.
Yeah.
It's an endless list. I kind of think that's also true with Christmas movies.
Okay. Well, that being said, thank you for ending your addendum there. And the good news is Greg Holtzman, the newest BloodStream team member, who people are going to hear from in just a little bit, is a new producer on the scene to help make sure that you don't feel rushed, that you have all the time you need to prepare all of your lists for the infinite number of things that you like.
I'm so happy. I haven't met Greg yet, but I'm excited too.
Well, you're going to meet him along with all the listeners in just a little bit. If you didn't catch it, you probably did. We released an episode on the Affordable Care Act just a few days ago. Most of the country, the Affordable Care Act is closed. Open enrollment is closed for 2020, but 57 million people, which is just about 20% of the country, are still eligible for coverage in 2020 through the exchanges on the Affordable Care Act. If you want to know more, go ahead one episode back in BloodStream and take a listen to that episode led by Ryan Gielen. We also have BloodStream Journeys episode 2 coming out, so if you haven't already, go subscribe to BloodStream Journeys on Apple Pod, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you listen to podcasts. Breaking Through, you've heard us talk about Breaking Through, and Hemophilia the Musical is currently taking registrations for the 2020 workshops taking place in 3 different locations around the country throughout the year. So please visit Breaking Through Hemophilia if you know a teen affected by hemophilia, von Willebrand disease, or a rare bleeding disorder. Head on over to breakingthroughhemophilia.com and get the information about our 2020 Art Therapy Musical Theater workshops. Also wanted to mention Bombardier Blood has screenings taking place all over the place the next few weeks, including in Budapest, Hungary today on the 20th, in Albany, New York, in Murfreesboro, Knoxville, and Memphis, Tennessee, Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, Chicago, Illinois, and Cleveland, Ohio.
Whoop, whoop.
And for more information about these and other screenings, or to inquire about screenings or anything related to Bombardier Blood, you can visit bombardierblood.com. Lastly, wanted to mention we are currently casting here at BloodStream Media and Believe Limited for a documentary about mental health and bleeding disorders, for a video series about professional advancement in our community, for profiles on people living with von Willebrand disease, and so much more. We're kind of casting something always. So if you're interested in getting involved in the storytelling work that we do, drop us a line, mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com, subject line casting. Give us a little bit of your story, let us know what you're interested in, and we will be sure to be in touch with projects that might be of interest to you. And lastly, I'm lying because that one was lastly, but this is the new lastly, so I'm calling it lastly. It's like a PPS. lastly, Trust Me, I'm Sick, a new series from Suffering the Silence, has just released its trailer, Trust Me, I'm Sick, on Facebook TV. You're going to hear the audio from that trailer later on in this episode. A pretty cool series that I think audiences for this podcast are going to enjoy. So Trust Me, I'm Sick. A preview of that coming up in just a little bit, but now it's time for the Like segment. Okay, it is now time for the episode 44 segment, which is made possible this month by Genentech. As you know, Challenge Accepted Show is their exciting new web series hosted by magician and comedian Justin Willman. Challenge Accepted shines a spotlight on members of the Hemophilia A community as they walk alongside celebrity coaches to overcome their everyday challenges and get outside of their comfort zones. In the newest episode, host Justin Willman challenges Damien, a high school baseball player, to think quickly on his feet no matter what hemophilia throws his way. I get it. Guest starring professional hockey coach David Quinn, who also has hemophilia. Episode 7 is on YouTube right now, and you can find it by going to YouTube and searching the phrase Challenge Accepted Show. You do have to use the whole phrase, Challenge Accepted Show, or by clicking the link in the program notes.
So this month's segment is an article that came out 2 weeks ago about the 28 patient groups that are disappointed in the Fifth Circuit's court ruling in Texas versus the U.S. So when I saw this article, I had to look and see what Texas versus the U.S. is all about.
Sounds pretty substantial.
Yeah.
It's a big state versus the country.
Yeah. And
so what is it?
So what I found out, I actually found a super cool website called theusconstitution.org, and it's put out by the Constitutional Accountability Center, which I thought was kind of cool.
The Constitutional Accountability Center. I'm
yeah.
glad we have a center for that.
But the website's great because it breaks down the case in really understandable ways. So there's a case summary, and I'd read a bunch of abstracts before this that I was like, what?
Right.
And I think I'm pretty smart.
I know, but sometimes even the abstracts are just too dense.
Yeah. So this website broke it down for me and explained that in April 2018, Texas and 19 other states, as well as 2 individual plaintiffs, filed a complaint in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas, arguing the law's individual mandate provision, which they refer to as Section 5000A, is unconstitutional, and that the rest of the law is inseverable from that provision and therefore must also fall.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I understand what that means.
Sure. So basically two parts, the individual mandate and then its inseverability from the rest.
Yeah, and because of that, the ACA
itself being unconstitutional.
Yes.
As a result, right.
What I learned is the Department of Justice normally defends the validity of acts of Congress when they're challenged in court. But with this one, the department joined the plaintiff's side in attacking the validity of the individual mandate and also argued key provisions of the law are inseverable. So not only they agreed with the whole point of the plaintiff, like
at the district level,
the Department of Justice.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So the Federal Department of Justice normally defends
Congress's decisions.
Sure.
Right.
But in this case did not, which is an interesting thing about this case specifically. So on March 25th, 2019, the House of Representatives filed its opening brief making 3 points against the plaintiff. The plaintiff's lacking standing to challenge Section 5000A, which is the individual mandate.
And why is that?
These are just the opening brief making 3 points.
But do you know why they say the individuals didn't have standing to bring this case to court in the first place?
Because they're the opposing counsel. So they're saying in their opening brief, like you lack standing. So prove us that you have standing.
Okay.
That Section 5000A, as amended in 2017, which we'll get into, is constitutional. That's their second point. So prove that it's not constitutional. And 3, even if Section 5000A is unconstitutional, the provision is severable from the remainder of the ACA.
Got it. Okay.
So saying to the plaintiffs, prove these 3 things.
Right. So plaintiffs there's 2 bones to pick, and the response is prove these 3 things.
Yes.
Okay.
It ended in a 2-1 decision, and the Fifth Circuit held the plaintiff states have standing to bringing this case, and that Section 5000A is unconstitutional. And on the issue of severability, the court remanded the issue to district courts, instructing to the court to explain with more precision what provisions in post-2017 ACA are indeed inseverable from the individual mandate. So what does that mean? So let's talk about quickly why post-2017. So in 2017, they made an amendment to Section 5000A that basically said there was no consequence for not getting insurance.
Right. The tax penalty went down to 0. So while there's still technically a tax penalty, it went to 0.
They were saying after this amendment, that's what we're talking about now. So the one judge, Judge King, in dissent, concluded the individual mandate was constitutional and that it is severable. But of course, it was a 2-1 decision. So what that means is the severability piece is going back to the district courts. And the mandate part has been decided as unconstitutional. So now that's going to go back, and they will, with information now of this part being unconstitutional, they're going to have to figure out if it is indeed inseverable. The article, these 28 patient groups, their statement, what's important about this ruling and how does it affect patients? So it's important for patients and their collective responses. It's important for patients and consumers to understand that the current law remains in place as the case awaits further action by the courts. Protections for millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions stay in place. People who have purchased healthcare for 2020 from healthcare.gov will remain covered. And the millions of Americans who have coverage through Medicaid expansion will also remain covered. So if you are covered right now and you have a pre-existing condition, do not worry about the here and now. But they also issued a statement saying, at the same time, our organizations are deeply disappointed by the Fifth Circuit Court did not definitively uphold the remainder of the Affordable Care Act, leaving open the possibility that millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions will one day find themselves without access to the Affordable Care Act's important protections.
That's where the real vulnerability lies, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what's really frightening about this is not, to your point, the immediate, but that's the potential now.
Yeah. And their last collective statement was, our organizations will continue to argue the urgent need for the Affordable Care Act to remain the law of the land. And these 28 patient organizations include the Hemophilia Federation of America, National Hemophilia Foundation, but then also a bunch of different disease and disorder states. Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, American Liver, American Lung,
March
Arthritis.
of Dimes is on there.
Yeah,
The JDRF is on there. Susie
March
Komen
of
is on
Dimes.
there.
And we'll have a link to this article in the program notes if you want to look at all 28 of the organizations. But what's kind of exciting is they've come together to say, like, collectively, this could be very problematic, and we will fight together.
What happens now? What are the next series of steps? It goes to the district court, and then what, in theory, happens if they go to the district court level and find that, okay, indeed, these other pieces are inextricably linked to the unconstitutional mandate or are also unconstitutional? What is kind of the path then?
So because it was at the Court of Appeals and it's going back to the district court, I'm not sure if it will then go back to the Court of Appeals or if it will go directly to the Supreme Court.
I think it goes to the Court of Appeals first, but the thought is that it's going to wind up at the Supreme Court kind of one way or another.
Yeah, so nothing to worry about imminently, but there are threats to people with pre-existing conditions if this is deemed inseverable.
And to clarify, when you're saying nothing to worry about, currently the Affordable Care open enrollment for the exchanges of the Affordable Care Act are still open in a number of states. This does not impact your ability to get insurance. So don't let a story like this also dissuade you from taking the steps necessary to get insurance through the exchanges. There's no immediate aftermath to this decision.
Right. So I just thought it was interesting, and sometimes reading a title like that is a little intimidating because, and then even going to look for what is this case about, the first few clicks, it's like, oh, this is really challenging to read. But the website, usconstitution.org, was really
good resource.
Digestible.
It's theusconstitution.org?
theusconstitution.org.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Well, thank you, Natalie.
Of course.
And thank you to Genentech for sponsoring the Like segment this month. Don't forget to check out the new episode of Challenge Accepted Show on YouTube. Reminder, use all 3 words, Challenge Accepted Show on YouTube. Okay, next I would like to introduce you to BloodStream Media's newest team member. I mentioned at the top of the show we've expanded the team. Podcast producer Greg Holdsman is the newest member of BloodStream, and on what was his second day of work earlier this month, he sat down with me to talk about his interests and passion for podcasting, his work here at Believe Limited, and his work on his very own Philly Famous podcast. Here is my conversation with our newest team member, Greg Holdsman. So joining me now for episode 44 of the BloodStream podcast is the latest hire to Believe Limited, our podcast producer and a host himself, Greg Holdsman. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Patrick. Thanks so much for one, having me on, and two, for hiring me. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Well, you're welcome on both accounts. And so you're probably an expert in this world now because you've been here for what now, 3-4 months?
In LA?
No, in Believe.
Oh, no. Oh, yes? No? What's the answer?
Today's day 2 for Greg, so I'm just putting him on the spot. Today's actually day 2. When did you actually make the move to LA?
I moved into my apartment 3 days ago.
Wow. Okay. And how has that process been so far?
I mean, I got really lucky. I found a diamond in the rough. And I'm in Silver Lake, but I visited probably 15 or 20 different apartments with various roommates that I have some horror stories that I'll share with you afterwards.
Oh, please do. Please do. So you are you originally from Philly?
I'm originally from Philly, born and raised.
Yeah, and you were there until what, 3 days ago?
Yeah, I spent two years, my first years in college in Ohio, in Granville, at a school called Denison. But for the rest of my life, and for the last 2 years of college at Temple, I've been in the city. I live I'm from a neighborhood called Mount Airy, which, if you drive through, it feels a little suburban, but it has a Philly zip code. So I always get upset when people say, "Yo, you're from outside of Philly. You're from Mount Airy." Well, it's inside of Philly. So I'm really proud to say that.
Well, we'll give you that credit here.
Yeah.
We're not going to take that away from you. It'll be a couple of weeks by the time people hear this. But have you recovered from the Eagles' loss? How are you doing with that?
Oh, I was just proud of how hard they fought. Yeah, wasn't expecting much.
That's a very reasonable perspective. I'm proud of how you sound like a father. I'm proud of how hard they fought. They played real well out there. So you do not have hemophilia.
I do not.
You do not have von Willebrand's disease. Why don't you give our listeners here a little insight as to how you and I got to know each other, how you got to working in podcasts, how it is that you're on this mic right now?
Yeah, well, again, I want to thank you you reached out to me a couple months ago with a lot about Believe and your interest in how I can help. And since then, I've done a lot of research on both you, the company, and the bleeding disorder community more broadly. And it's a really tightly knit, kind of exciting world that I didn't know much about.
Sure.
But yeah, so about me, I got into podcasting and content creation now a little over 2 years ago. I mentioned briefly a minute ago that I played. Oh, I didn't say it. Did I did. I played basketball at a school in Ohio called Denison.
So you went there specifically for basketball?
Went there specifically for basketball, and that really was the basis of my decision to go there, to leave Philly, to go to Ohio, to play basketball. And in my first 16 months, I got 4 different head injuries sequentially. Each one was kind of spaced out 3 or 4 months from the other. All of them were playing. One was actually in the weight room. And I had, for the next 2.5 years, what was called post-concussive syndrome, which just kind of gave me a variety of pretty intense physical and mental symptoms that didn't allow me to play anymore. And even if I was cleared to by my doctor, I wouldn't have felt well enough to step on a court. And a lot of these symptoms didn't allow me to watch TV, to exercise, to read. So what I did to kind of fill my time and to kind of keep myself out of a really, really deep depression was just consume audio content, because that's what I could do without making myself feel worse. And that's how I really got intrigued by the medium of podcasting and audio. So when I transferred back home to Temple, to Philly for my junior years, when I started Philly Famous, just a show based around highlighting Philly's most dynamic influencers in a whole host of industry sectors. It's called Philly Famous Podcast, and it's now just over 2 years old. I've done over 125 episodes, and Temple picked up the TV adaptation of the show. So I did 10 TV episodes, and yesterday I was actually notified that it was nominated for Best TV Talk Program for the Intercollegiate Broadcasting System Awards. So in March, in New York City, it'll be announced whether it won or not.
Oh, congrats, man. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
It's very cool. Yeah. So I was really excited about that. So that's me. So it basically took me 2.5 years to recover from the injuries. I'm now about a year out from that, and I feel great. I'm so excited to be on the West Coast. Very excited to be at Believe. And thank you again.
Yeah, of course, man. Tell me about, obviously I have an affinity for audio and podcasting and have for a very long time. What is it about the medium? Clearly, when you were, recovering, it was what you could do, as you mentioned. But what is it that has stuck out to you about the medium? Why are you still attracted to it? What makes podcasting and what makes this audio experience special to you?
What immediately stuck out to me when I was really going through my concussions and the recovery was how connected I felt to the people that I was listening to. I felt like I knew them, especially when I was listening to different shows on a regular basis, especially when they were interview-based shows, where I really got to feel like I became friendly with the interviewer. And it kept me connected to a larger, smart, funny conversation. I almost felt like I was in the room. And when I couldn't go out to parties or I couldn't play sports, it kept me connected to the world and what was going on. So for me, that's what really drew me in. And now I feel the same way when I'm talking to my listeners. I feel that I'm connected to their lives and vice versa.
Well, you mentioned day 2, right? And you're new to bleeding disorders. You did a bunch of research and homework getting ready for this job. There'll be a lot of on-the-job learning and training, of course. What have you discovered thus far that has stuck out to you for any reason about this community, about the content that's available for it, or the resources, anything bleeding disorders related that has just made you kind of go, I would have never known that?
One of the other things I've noticed, and what you're saying, is that kind of the collective search for answers and for improvements in the medical field. And one thing that I learned very quickly in my own health journey is, like you said, be your own self-advocate. Doctors and medical professionals only know so much. And at least in my world, in the concussion world, what I picked up on very quickly was that the field knew actually very little about the brain. And there was a quote. It was like, we know more about space than we do about the human brain. And I think I've picked up on, maybe not to such an extreme with bleeding disorders and hemophilia, but all the answers are not there yet.
Correct.
And there's still a lot of questions. And one thing that Believe, at least what I've gathered so far, is trying to do is use a collective effort and kind of resource sharing to help people get closer to those answers.
Correct. Or at the very least get closer to the questions that we're currently asking that may not have answers. So tell me, again, you're new here and we're just figuring this out. And as you've come to learn from a couple of days of meetings, there's a lot that's changing from what we already do that you're trying to catch up on. So a lot of to be determineds coming. But as we sit here today, what do you hope to accomplish as a podcast producer here at Believe Limited?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I want to. Well, from what I've gathered, in my like you said, 2 days here, the team at Believe is really strong right now, in all forms of content creation, but particularly in long form and short form filmmaking.
Correct.
And the podcast network is incredibly strong as well, but maybe not at the level of the other two components of what Believe does.
It's growing the quickest, for sure.
It's growing the quickest. And I really hope to make it, at least selfishly from my point of view, the forefront of what Believe does.
Well, thank you for the enthusiasm and the energy that you've brought to this. Listeners are going to hear you on some shows. Greg's going to be producing shows, and you'll hear his name in credits. And like he said, he does have the Philly Famous podcast, which you should go check out on Apple Podcasts. I'm sure there's a website as well.
It's phillyfamouspodcast.com.
So you can hear him as an interviewer and a host as well. And congratulations on the nomination, and fingers crossed for good news in March.
Thank you. And thanks again for having me here.
You got it, man. Welcome aboard. Virus used in gene therapies may pose cancer risk. Dog study hints.
What a title.
From Science Mag, an article published on January 6th by Jocelyn Kaiser. And as Natalie knows, I have done a deep dive. I've done a rabbit hole deep dive into the world of gene therapy again. I feel like I keep doing it and I keep finding new things.
But I feel like every time you do it and then you explain it, like this time I'm like, oh, I get viral vectors a little bit better than I did. Like it's one of those things that like I think you need to be explained it like 150 times, and then every time you're like, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, every time there's like a little bit more context absorbing, and so everything.
Or it's said in a different way that you're like, oh, that resonates with me. I get that. So what's this study say?
Well, so let me read the first paragraph from this article because I think it frames this conversation well. Just as gene therapy finally seems to be living up to its promise, a study has revived a lingering worry about the viral vessel that many efforts rely on to ferry therapeutic genes into patients. This vector, a stripped-down version of the adreno-associated virus, AAV, was thought to be safe because it rarely knits the human DNA it carries into the cell's chromosomes where it might activate cancer-causing genes. But a study of dogs with hemophilia treated with AAV up to 10 years earlier has shown that the vector can readily insert its payload into the host's DNA near genes that control cell growth. That's a dense paragraph, but it's actually extremely accurate and without much spin. I'm going to try to give this as straightforward a through line as I can, and Natalie will hopefully help keep me on track. So
that's a big order.
Big undertaking. I said help try. I threw a few caveat words in there for you.
All right.
So gene therapy is not new. In fact, there have been gene therapy clinical trials going on for hemophilia for a couple of decades now. In fact, there were trials in I think it was the 90s where children did develop cancer as a result of their gene therapy, and that immediately seized the trials that were taking place. This AAV, the adreno-associated virus, the reason that it's of particular interest, as referenced in that opening paragraph, is because unlike predecessors used as vectors, because you can use different viruses as vectors. Really all a vector is the vehicle bringing the stuff. It's like the school bus carrying the kids to school. In the case of the previous vector, the school bus would then park and stay at the school. So the bus is now part of the school.
Never went back to the depot.
Never went back to the depot. It's not doing any more rounds. It now lives forever at the school. It's a one-trip bus. Now with AAV, part of its attractiveness to scientists is that it's considered free-floating. I think the word is episome. Don't quote me on that, or look up EPISOME, which I guess we could be doing right now. But it's free-floating. It does not attach itself. It does not integrate. That's the buzzword, integrate into the cells, into chromosomes. It just drops its, quote, payload, as it's referred to here, off. So what was found in AAV studies with mice about 10 years ago is that there were indeed formation or indications of integration taking place. So AAV has been used in studies where it has been shown to potentially spur cell growth that could lead to cancer. This was seen in mice. And in 2016, there was a commentary published, Genotoxicity in Mice Following AAV Gene Delivery, a safety concern for gene therapy in humans, or a safety concern for human gene therapy? ? I got the words wrong, but you get the idea. Perfect title for a commentary if you're wondering, hey, it was a problem for mice. Is it going to be a problem for me? The 8-page dense commentary, I think, can be distilled to this one sentence. Because MIR341, which is a microRNA, so that's an RNA molecule that does like silencing or regulation of gene expression work. So because MIR341, this microRNA, which appears to be the nucleus of the adreno-associated virus cancer formation site in mice, is missing from the genomes of other large animals commonly used in gene therapy studies, such as rabbits, cats, dogs, and non-human primates, the general extension of murine data, mouse data, from AAV-associated cancer warrants critical assessment. In other words, if we don't have this microRNA in rabbits, cats, dogs, non-human primates, humans, then should we really be concerned about the formation of something in that microRNA in mice
that we do not have,
that we do not possess in the first place?
One would think not.
One would think not. So the study suggests we should be looking for other large animals that also don't have this microRNA to see what happens there. Well, as it turns out, there was a study of 9 dogs with hemophilia A, and after the study was complete, 6 of those dogs their livers were studied, and indeed they found that the AAV had integrated into the dog's liver cells. I'll find the direct quote.
And that's exactly what we thought wouldn't happen with the AAV, that it would be an episome, free floating. But in this case, there was the integration, which was that problematic or?
Well, so that is where the story stops.
Okay.
There was not cell growth. There was not cancer development. These dogs did not get cancer. This study isn't saying the dogs got cancer. People might. The dogs did not. But what the study did find, well, I'll quote it. This is from Science Mag, after ending the experiment and studying the livers of 6 dogs, the scientists' team found that in every one of them, AAV fairy DNA, either the factor VIII gene or more often fragments of regulatory sequences, which is essentially like the stuff that's surrounding the factor VIII gene to help get it there. So either the factor VIII gene or that stuff had integrated in many spots across the genome in the dog's liver cells, sometimes near genes affecting cell growth. So the thing that we thought made AAV extremely exciting, at least in dogs, has shown to not necessarily be the case after all. It has not led to cancer, but the potential for it is there. I posted something about this on Facebook. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's like the why the title has.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Virus used in gene therapies may pose cancer risk. Dog study hint.
The may and the hint.
A lot of heavy lifting in some of those tiny words. Well done, editor responsible for that. And well done, Jocelyn Kaiser, who actually has a long track record in writing about gene therapy. If you're interested in someone who writes in a way that is substantial but understandable and seems to have a long history in doing so, incredible, Jocelyn Kaiser at Science Mag. But I wanted to mention, so I posted about this on Facebook, and a few people in the community and a hematologist, I had just mentioned that there's reason for pause. This gives reason for pause, and really I was actually quoting David Lillycrap of, what's the world-renowned hematologist. David Lillycrap is involved in a lot of gene therapy work for quite a long time, and he acknowledges that we don't yet have enough information about AAV. And I just kind of pointed that out as like, if he is taking a pause, I'm taking a pause. And people had responded, we do have human trials with gene therapy for hemophilia B now, where patients have been on the therapy at least 8 years, and we have seen no expression or no sign of AAV integration, no sign of cancerous cell growth, nothing. And that's 8 years in, or at least in 2014, the study came out and I think reported that they were 3 years in, and now it's 2020 and there's been no update. So again, this is like not unlike our story about the Affordable Care Act and the Texas versus US. There's no immediate action item here. There's nothing that you need to go do. It's just more information. And if you're someone who, I guess the action item is, if you are someone who is considering a gene therapy clinical trial, someone who has a family member on one, or you yourself, whatever, if you're connected to the actual trials and being in a trial, as we learn more about this exploratory investigational science, it's worth just taking in that new information and determining what might that mean for your next series of choices.
What's so interesting about stuff like this is studies come out and we collectively make decisions based on, I had just finished a book for my doula, furthering my doula understanding, called Expecting Better. Mm-hmm. And behavioral economist Emily Oster goes through, and basically like there's studies that come out where like the risk is like 1 in 12,000, and so we all decide not to do a thing. And it's just interesting because these collective decisions not to take risks, is it slowing down development?
Do you know what I heard this morning?
What?
That no one in America has been killed by a refugee who had come into the country under refugee status since like 1977 or something. So someone ran the numbers, and like your odds in a given year of being killed by a refugee are like 1 in 300 something billion. And then it's like your odds of being killed by a shark are like 1 in 2 million something, like extraordinarily better. But the fear of the idea
Sure.
of it's the irrational, it's the emotional, it's the stuff that we respond to. This is the logical, rational stuff that doesn't always actually motivate the behavior.
Well, and that's, I mean, breaking that down even further is like sometimes they'll do studies where they're like, 9 people a year die by couch.
Right.
Like we're killed by their couch, swallowed by their couch.
Yes.
And that's not a true fact, but
no, but something like that.
But
there's
something
the
like
vending
that
machine
where you're
ones
where you're just like, okay, so 1 in 6 billion will be killed by a refugee, but like watch out for that couch.
Yeah, exactly. Watch out for that couch.
But yeah, so it's just important to pay attention but not to get scared by this stuff.
No, again, not to get scared by it, and unless you're involved in a trial, there's nothing for you to do right now. The article is in Science Mag. There'll be a link in the program notes. Virus used in gene therapies may pose cancer risk. Dog study hints. The comment segment for episode 44 of the BloodStream podcast. Trust Me, I'm Sick is the title of a short documentary series exploring life with chronic illness, which premieres on January 27th. It comes from Suffering the Silence in partnership with Arlo Pictures, and the trailer dropped earlier this month. We asked the folks at Suffering the Silence if they wouldn't mind us sharing the audio of this very effective trailer, and they agreed, so we would like to do that now. Here it is, the audio from Trust Me, I'm Sick, a new documentary series exploring life with chronic illness.
It seems like you're just lazy. You've inflicted this disease on yourself.
Maybe you're just depressed. Maybe you should just see a therapist.
Just try harder. Just get up. You're fine. Illness that is incurable and lifelong is really hard to talk about because we've been trained not to talk about it. We've been told to be ashamed of it.
She told me, keep it to yourself. Nobody has to know what you go through. And something in the back of my head clicked like, no, everybody's gonna know. I'm telling everybody.
This is my life. This is my normal. I am not ashamed of my story. I'm proud of my story, all of what it entails, the sad parts, the angry parts, the triumphs, the failures, all of it.
Trust Me, I'm Sick, again, premieres on January 27th. Visit trustmeimsick.com for more or follow Suffering the Silence on social media.
Takeda, the presenting sponsor of BloodStream podcast, provides practical and insightful resources for the bleeding disorders community. Takeda provides support such as help with copay assistance, insurance support and education, healthcare reform tools and resources, and phone support from the Takeda Hematology Support Center. Simply visit bleedingdisorders.com/resources to learn more. That's bleedingdisorders.com/resources.
BloodStream listeners, as we mentioned toward the top of the show, we have new shows that we wanted to preview, and one of those is Amy Board's latest guest on the Ask the Expert podcast. It's hematologist and researcher and VWD expert Christopher Ning. And if you're listening here to BloodStream, chances are you'd enjoy and learn from the interviews. So I definitely recommend you subscribe to the Ask the Expert podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Yeah, that's my voice. That's like, you should do it. But just to give you
you should see the face that accompanies that voice.
Both of them are very convincing. But I'm going to run for office on this page. But just to give you a snippet, we have a short clip from Ask the Expert that we'll play for you right now. The clip is about the complicated nuances of VWD testing and why patients receive different diagnoses at different treatment centers.
The other aspect of it that definitely makes it tricky is that we, as a kind of community of patients, of providers who treat people with VWD, we haven't really well established a particular numerical cutoff for when someone fits a diagnosis of von Willebrand's disease. And this is probably one of the single biggest vexing issues to patients, and it's completely understandable. So one example I like to use is that if you, for example, had a von Willebrand factor level of 40 in your blood, in different centers in the country, in the United States, in different centers across Canada, the UK, other places, you may actually get a different diagnosis because the cutoffs are different in every place.
Really?
Yeah, so that you can see how that can lead to some uncertainty, right? So some people might say, well, in this place I was diagnosed with von Willebrand disease, but now I'm coming here and you're telling me that I maybe don't have it or my levels don't meet the criteria. And so fundamentally, I think that obviously instills a lot of uncertainty for individuals.
Follow the links on bloodstreammedia.com to subscribe to the Ask the Expert podcast on Apple Pod, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if there's an expert that you want to hear from or a topic you want to hear about, email us, mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. Now for the interview is Kim Phelan. Kim is the Vice President of the Coalition for Hemophilia B, the Executive Director and moderator of the Anxiety and Phobia Peer Support Network, live and online for 5 years, and a contributor to the book Conquering Panic and Anxiety Disorders by Jenna Glatzer. She's here today to speak with us about the recent passing of community member Nat Lathrop, a member of the coalition, as well as to talk a little bit about her own experience with anxiety, depression, and mental health challenges, and the goings-on of the coalition in general. Good morning, Kim. How are you?
Good morning, Patrick. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I really want to thank you for what you're doing for the community. Your podcasts are so important to raising awareness.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you coming on under not the best of circumstances. What can you tell me about Nat Lathrop and his family?
My God. Nat is such a sweetheart, he was such a loving kid. I've known him since he's about 7 or 8 years old. And they're a wonderful family. I don't think that I know another mother who advocates so much for their child as Jill does. She's amazing. She really, really went to bat for him. She fought really hard for him, and he really got to a good place. Unfortunately, he must have spiraled backward sometime over a number of days. We don't know the full story. The parents are still in mourning, so I can only speculate at this point.
Fair enough. And we certainly don't want to speculate too much in these circumstances. That's not necessarily a healthy or wise choice. I am curious to know, you mentioned how his mother, Jill, fought for him. Can you, to the degree to which you can and feel comfortable doing so, can you share with us what it was that she was fighting for? What was Nat's challenge that Jill was supporting?
He had diagnosis of psychosis and depression, anxiety, several issues that needed to be taken care of. And in the past couple of years, she fought really hard for him, for his mental health, and for his life. And she succeeded to the point where he was able to get in his apartment, get a job, live a good, productive life, enjoyed his music, writing songs, had friends, good social life. He was doing great. He was doing great. It was not ignored. It wasn't something that was hidden. It wasn't something that she allowed to be ignored. She fully embraced what was going on, and she was very proactive.
Which makes it all the more painful and frustrating, I'm sure, to have the challenge identified, to have a management plan in place, to be seeing success and results from that plan, and then for something like this to occur. What else have you seen in the coalition and the Hemophilia B community when it comes to mental health and mental health challenges? How common is it? What do you hear in your leadership position? Give us a snapshot of what you see as the experience from the coalition's point of view.
Well, I've been doing this for 28 years, right? And there have been many who suffered through depression, especially when they took the first Hep C treatment, right, which caused major depression. But we had a tight buddy system, right? There was always someone to call at 3 a.m. And I just noticed that there's a social stigma with emotional health. We take care of the medical side, but not the psychological part, and they should go hand in hand. We increase their meds, but not their need for self-care. And Oh my God, it's like shame is like our worst enemy, because the more you share, the more it opens for others to get, share their messy lives. So Patrick, we need to talk about it, and we need to make this part of our normal conversations, and we have to let go of shame and guilt and begin healing. This past weekend, I was on the phone for hours with families, and we are seeing an alarming rate of anxiety and depression in children as young as 10 years old, talking about suicide. You see, I'm getting upset. We're seeing kids and people of all ages angry and frustrated because they're sick of everything. They're sick of the numerous infusions. They're sick of medical appointments, having to drop and go to the hospital, and all their plans being changed. It can be really devastating. And I heard this one story about sometimes kids are not invited to a sleepover because the parents don't want to deal with a child with hemophilia, even though the parents have been told it's okay. And the parents right down the block, they're not even invited to a sleepover because the parent doesn't want to deal with it. So we've talked about shame. And, kids also feel their parents' shame. They feel their parents' shame. They feel their parents' stress. They feel their fear. And even when the parents don't say it, the kids feel it. And then you have young adults, right? And maybe they don't know how to deal with real life issues because they stay home longer with their family. They learn to manage their factor, the cost of living, but is it a generational issue? And compiled with hemophilia, is this something that's triggering the original trauma they had from childhood, causing more stress? Dating issues, and I know you probably went through this yourself, right? How do I tell them? When do I tell them? Some are concerned, like, if someone stops seeing me, is it because I have hemophilia? And feeling of being rejected, right? And you know what? Everyone I speak to, all the guys in the community, I tell them one thing. When someone loves you, they're going to love you no matter what you have. Depression can really get worse with too many stressors, right? And we need a list of what those top 10 stressors are. So, that can cause a flare-up. If you're getting married, you're buying a house, you're going for a degree, you're making all these changes all at once, you need to get yourself in check. Then they're also worried about their career. If they had too many target leads and I have all these problems, who's going to hire me? Who's going to want to cover my insurance? And then I have very smart kids are prone, and they're more sensitive to life situations. They understand the insurance system, and it terrifies them. They're afraid of the uncertainty of loss. And these are things that kids should never, ever have to worry about. And then we have overuse of pain meds. And certain meds can also have an effect and make you angry when you're on them for a long time. And this is pretty common. As well, self-medicating with drugs and alcohol to numb their pain. And then sometimes as they get older, they realize, hey, the advantages of the perks of seeing a psychiatrist to give them meds, which they can abuse sometimes. Mm-hmm. So everyone is different, Patrick, but you have to show up in your life. You have to be honest about what's going on and really look at it. It'll make you healthier, and it's okay to say I'm not okay and that I need help.
You outlined so many different experiences that people can be having, specifically with kids. When parents come to you in your leadership role, and it's not necessarily a fair position, but I'm curious, in a leadership role, when parents come to you to say, my 10-year-old, my 13-year-old, they're experiencing this, they're saying this, what kind of direction, advice, or resources do you point people to? How do you respond to things like that?
Well, for my own personal issues, I've developed all these tools, right, that I have. And to really get the parents to be honest with themselves and what's going on, to be proactive in the child's care and to create, their own tools for kids. So I have like the top 10 takeaways from parents that I spoke to and what I've learned and what I'm helping others to do as well. There's a lot that we need to share, right? There's a lot the coalition needs to share. There's a lot. And listen, every organization is working really hard to make 2020 important. I want you to know the coalition, our goal for 2020 is to have mental health sessions in every program for all different ages. And in every single article of every edition of every publication we have, because it's that important. Debbie De La Riva is doing amazing work, and I've been talking with her, and we've been sharing. And now I've got my top 10 takeaways from parents, and I've got takeaway toolkits, things like pet therapy. Pets are so important to help people with depression, right, and anxiety. your podcast is on my toolkit.
Well, thank you for that. And as a new owner of an emotional support animal, I can certainly speak to the values of having the pet. Is that top 10 list sounds really helpful. Is there a digital version of that, or is that something the coalition could share online?
Yeah, I will share it with you, and it will be shared online. And I mean, there are so many tools, and there's so much in this community, and people have to take advantage of it. And if I have a few minutes, I'll give you the top quick 10 takeaways. So the top 10 that I found are: creating a positive self-image needs to happen earlier. It starts in the home. It's also reflected on how parents are talking about themselves. If the parent does not promote positive self-talk, it's really not good, because if a parent is saying to themselves, I'm dumb, or I'm stupid, or I'm fat, kids are going to mimic that behavior. So parents have to be aware of what they're saying to themselves. Number 2, don't be afraid to talk about suicide together as a family. Many are, but they may have, their child may have considered it. Parents need to pick up on things. They need to changes in behavior, right? With your child's actions and overall mood are important. But listen, it's complicated because, you're a normal adolescent who's going to go through their own thing, but you have to kind of say, okay, is this normal adolescence, or is this depression and anxiety? So you really got to keep an eye on it. And then getting the younger moms and dads to start early getting support, right? They really need to get into the community. They need to get the support of the community, and the kids need to be in the community so that they can be with other kids who have the same issues. You have to talk to your kids. Parents at dinner, they have to focus on something positive, like what's the best part of your day and what's the worst part of your day. Together, find ways to resolve the situation of the worst part of your day. No cell phones, just talking, open dialogue. And you know that kids, especially boys, they're really good to talk to when they're driving in a car because there's no eye contact. So you can have the best conversations with your kids driving.
It's funny you mentioned that. Just as a quick sidebar, I remember in theater school talking about writing plays and scenes that take place in cars, and how that's an environment where you can bring up topics that don't generally get brought up in other places, because there's a lack of eye contact, there's a sense of safety, it's nobody's environment, you're moving through an environment. So from a different perspective, I guess it's that same psychological idea in theater school is used to point out how that can be a good environment to write a compelling scene in. Just thought I'd share that.
No, absolutely. Even like games, activities are good for you too. But I mean, parents are really cool about, let's get my kid in a car, and I love this 40-minute drive because I get to talk to my kid, because he is not looking at me, I'm not looking at him, and we're having a really good conversation, right? And then, you need to express your concerns to your HTC, your school. You have to advocate and say, look, my kid needs counseling. Sometimes the HTC is too far away, and they resent that far car ride back and forth. So try to find something closer to home if you can. And make sure they know what setting therapy is going to be confidential. They don't want to know mom and dad are going to get a daily report. So it's really important the therapist says, hey, what goes on here stays here. You know what I mean? You have to find your voice and empower yourself to ask the questions instead of feeling like you need to tell everyone, like everyone needs to tell you what to do. If the relationship between you and your doctor or nurse are not working, then you have the right to switch that doctor or nurse. If you don't feel the therapist is working, you find another one. Have you heard of therapists that have a type of play therapy with pool tables and basketball hoops so that a child can open up more? I just heard of this. I thought it was really cool.
Oh my, there we go. No, but that makes a lot of sense to me. I want to go there.
I want to go there. I go to a therapist every Tuesday. I want a pool table.
Yeah, I'm going in 2 hours, but we just sit in couches. It's nothing the same.
Yeah, I'm going to advocate for adult child play.
All right, we'll follow up about that. That's our new mission. That's our side mission.
Oh, yeah. And number 8 is needing a mental health day is okay. Okay? So it's okay to have a pity day. We all have it, right? but then you need to get up and you need to get moving. And even if that means going to the grocery store or together or sitting on the couch or watching TV, kids with light depression or young adults, they don't want to talk about their depression. They just want to hang out and have normal conversations. And then keep an open mind when medications are concerned. Understand that, your child may need meds at a specific time, but it doesn't mean they'll be on it forever. So parents need to keep an open mind.
And adults, for that matter, on the topic of medication, adults need to keep an open mind too. But I appreciate that we're focusing on parents.
Oh, absolutely. No, adults, they, if they're going to be the one who's going to say yes, give my kid the meds, and adults too, they need to be open-minded and say, because some people think, oh my God, if I'm going to take this, I'm going to be on it forever, and it's not always the case. I mean, I took meds when I started with my anxiety, and I didn't have to take it forever and ever. And then do not ignore depression. Don't ignore depression that's going on for a long time. And this is, number 10 is a little heartbreaking for me. Anger bashing, anger bashing in the walls, getting to a point where you do not feel safe in your own home is not acceptable. One mom I talked to locked her bedroom door and kept mace by her bed. And she ended up telling her son to leave. He's now in counseling and living on his own, but they haven't spoken in over a year. She feels like her son hates her, and she tried everything. The mom is in counseling too, but there's still a lot of anger, and it's really sad. But I think, sometimes you have to let that child go when they're so disruptive, and to be okay with letting them be angry.
I mean, I haven't lived that experience, but I've heard from a few parents who have been in a situation similar to that which you're describing, and appreciate that, ultimately one can only do so much for any other human being, even if it is your child. So there does come a point where, for one's own self-interest and safety, a very difficult choice needs to be made. I hope to never be in such a position, but I certainly understand how people get there.
Absolutely. And conversations are had, and then it just escalates. And, what's a healthy time to allow this to go on? And then a time where you have to say, look, I'm not safe in my own home, and you need to get the help. And this is not the first story I've heard, so unfortunately, but sometimes this is what you need to do. And then, like, a final maintenance check is to check in with yourself. Monitor your life stressors. If you have a bleed for 20 days, depression is going to trigger. You got to use your tools. And this is like when I think about you, everyone needs to have a toolbox, right? A tool chest or whatever you want to call it. And check in. How many stresses do you have going on at one time?
Absolutely. You just mentioned something very important too, that if somebody has a bleed that's going on for a week, 2 weeks, that depression is may set in. That's okay, and that's normal. And that's something I've come to appreciate, that if something bad happens and I feel feelings of depression, that's actually normal. If there's something that is, impending, I've got a big project and the due date's tomorrow and I have anxiety about that, that's also normal. What is a problem is when these things become prolonged, outsized, when there is not a due date tomorrow and that anxiety is there, when there is not a bleed and that depression is there. That's when things start to get to a place of being dysfunctional. But something that I needed to hear a few times was that it's actually 100% normal to feel feelings of anxiety and depression if the circumstances that are compelling those feelings are appropriate for those feelings. It is abnormal, dysfunctional, in need of attention if those feelings are occurring in prolonged, outsized capacities or when there is not an incident itself. That's a significant difference that I think is important to appreciate. So if I'm someone sitting on the couch with a bleed and I'm depressed, I don't need to make it worse by saying, oh, and I'm depressed, I don't even appreciate what I do have. This depression is normal. This is a totally understandable experience, and it too shall pass. And it also doesn't have to be true and dominating, which for me is another thing that's been extraordinary to process. This idea of parts work, or what we know as compartmentalizing. I've never thought of myself as someone who's particularly good at compartmentalizing. But what I've come to appreciate is really all that means is that I can acknowledge that something is true, including an emotional experience I'm having, and choose not to let that bleed into every other aspect of my life. I can make a conscious choice in my mind to say, okay, I'm feeling some pain. I'm feeling some depression as a result of that pain. That's normal. That's okay. Here are the things I'm doing about it. And with that, I'm going to take a breath. And now I'm going to focus on that assignment I have to do, or dinner with my wife, or playing with my dog, or taking care of someone who I had made a commitment to. It can both be true and not overbearing and not dominating. And that's something I haven't until the recent past appreciated either, that I can have a, quote, negative emotional experience. That's true. And still, while managing it, carry on with my life. Not because I'm denying it or repressing it, but simply because I'm acknowledging it, and then I'm putting it in its box, and I'm putting that box on the shelf, and it's going to sit there until it needs to be opened again. And that's okay too.
Absolutely. And, that's what I did when I had my anxiety and my panic attacks in my 20s, right? They came about when I had major life stressors. I didn't know what it was. No one talked about it. And I told everybody I had a stomach ache. And I would hide. I would just totally hide from everything. And then after a year, I got the help that I needed, right? I mean, it got so bad to the point where I couldn't even get on a bus. I had to retrain my brain to get on a bus and go one stop and get off and then go back home. And the next day I had to get up, and then I would go 2 stops on the bus, and I would go back home. And maybe the third day I would go home and pull the covers over my head. But I kept trying and never giving up, all while I was still working. And I couldn't get on a bus, but I could get on a plane and travel and do my work, right? And that's why I'm saying therapy is so important. And that's why, when people didn't talk about anxiety when I had it, this is like, mental health now with suicide. People don't want to talk about it. But once you talk about it, you feel so much better. And once we normalize it, it gets better.
It's true. It really is true. I have a feeling you and I could talk about this topic for quite a while, but we are at the end of our time. I think you and I maybe should do this again in the next couple months. Specifically, the subject of panic attacks and anxiety disorders is something I would love to chat with you some more about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Kim. Again, I wish it was under better circumstances, but it's under the circumstances that are true. And I think, as you said, it's important that we talk about these incidents when they happen, that we talk about suicide, and that we also take a moment to acknowledge, as you said right at the beginning, that Nat, while he struggled with these things, he was an incredible musical talent. He had a generous and loving spirit, that he was a positive person. And of course, this is part of his story now. But I also think it's worth remembering that he was a whole person and a happy person, too, from what I could gather from comments on Facebook posts and whatnot. Just because someone is struggling with something in their head doesn't mean that they're not a person capable of enjoying life and spreading joy. And that certainly seemed to have been one of those people. So thank you for coming here, too, to give his life a little bit of spotlight this morning.
Well, you're welcome, Patrick. Thank you for having me. Again, thank you for everything that you do. You're really going to change. You're going to change a lot of people's lives, and for that, I'm so grateful.
Well, it's a team effort, and I appreciate you being a teammate. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Patrick.
The BloodStream podcast is brought to you by Takeda. Visit bleedingdisorders.com for more on all that Takeda offers the bleeding disorders community. And joining me now, as she does every month, except for last month, sorry about that, Mom, but we gave you a month off, is Mama Sue. So we will keep the segment a little shorter. We're tight on time this month. So I wanted to ask you, what are you most interested in? What are you thinking about the most in the world of entertainment this month, Mom?
Well, what I watched very recently on Amazon was a documentary, a full-feature documentary called One Child Nation, about the one-child policy in China.
What led you to watch that? Why? What made you interested in that as a topic in the first place?
So, the streaming gives suggestions based on other things you've watched, and I do watch things about other countries and children, I guess, and it just popped up as a suggestion, and I just chose it.
If by a suggestion and chose it, you mean Netflix just automatically starts preloading things and forcing you to immediately watch and listen to things you did not choose? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, it's effective. Well, good. I'm glad you watched it. So what was most interesting to you about, well, tell people what this policy kind of is and what makes it interesting or controversial.
Well, I did know about the one-child policy in China for the last couple of decades, which is what it sounds like, that everyone was very much encouraged and even financially rewarded. All families were encouraged and rewarded to have just one child because they're so overpopulated. I knew about that part. I knew that you received rewards, financial and otherwise, but I didn't know that it was so strictly enforced that people against their will were being forced to have abortions, and people were giving away their babies, just abandoning them in fairs. It was quite a disturbing film, but well worth seeing. I recommend it, but it's very sad, actually.
What was the film's kind of message? What was the point of the film beyond exposing these atrocities?
Well, it was made by a Chinese young woman who, in recent years, was probably born by the one-child policy. She was born by the one-child policy, and she went back and made a documentary and interviewed many of the people. She was from a small village, and most people in China live in the rural areas. And they had these people called family planners and special kind of midwives that brutally enforced the one-child policy rule. Unless you had some money to buy yourself out of it. She had a little brother, because she was born a girl. Every family wants a boy. So she had a brother. The only way her mom was allowed to keep it and go through with the pregnancy was they had to pay and bribe their way with the family planners. They interviewed the nurse midwives who said that, if the women came in to have the baby and they knew that they already had a child at home, they would snap the neck. They said this right on the film and tell the woman, oh, your baby was born dead. So it was quite brutal. There's pictures of women being dragged out of their homes 9 months pregnant. And everyone resoundingly said we had no choice. We had no choice. And even the women who abandoned their girl babies in the markets, because I never really understood why in China and in other cultures, why they wanted a boy so much. If you were going to have one child, it had to be a boy. But what I now found out from this movie was in that country, if you have a boy and he marries, he and his wife will take care of you. She joins your family. But if you have a daughter and she marries, she will join the husband's family eventually, and you'll have nobody to take care of you when you're older. Of course, there's no social welfare system over there. So you're actually going to be destitute and homeless if you don't have a child, a son, to take care of you. So that's, it's very complicated. I mean, it's very brutal to me as a Westerner to see this, but I understand how the people feel, because you have to be very detached from your child if it's a girl. Be willing to either give it away or abandon it, but nobody wants girls. So now, since 2015, which I didn't realize, they've done away with the one-child policy because they have not enough young people to take care of the elderly now. So now the propaganda is having 2 children, and the lady shows you all the propaganda all around with, billboards saying, oh, your child needs a little friend to play with. 2 children is the best to have, blah, blah, blah. So now it's totally the opposite. It's still a problem if you happen to have just girls, because you still want a boy, but at least you can have 2 chances to get a boy in your life.
Well, sure, but if you have 2 girls, it sounds like you're kind of in double trouble. I will have to point out there, as we're coming up on the end of our time, I did catch you actually saying that that parents would wind up destitute if they didn't have a son to take care of them. So, Mama Sue, I just want to point out, I heard it, okay? I got it. I got the message.
Hint, hint, hint.
Loud and clear. Mom, thank you. This was not the most uplifting review, but certainly interesting and something relevant and important. And when I think about health and disease and disability, my God, to be in a culture where that's how you think about children and family planning, that's a really frightening thought, but it's a reality. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit of it with us and coming on and doing this with me again, Mom.
Okay, thank you. I'll talk to you next time.
Talk to you next month. All right, so that's just about all for episode 44 of the BloodStream podcast. But there's one thing we neglected to do, isn't there, Natalie?
We have a new member of our family.
Should we introduce him?
Yeah, maybe he can introduce himself.
Okay. Is that you telling him that you're Russell? Uh-huh. And how old are you? 14 weeks. That's right. Very good. That's nice. What are some of the things you like to do? You want to tell the listeners? That's
Wiggle.
right.
He likes to
He likes
wiggle.
wiggling, chasing balls. Russell is the latest member of the family and my travel companion and life colleague. You're my life colleague. Yeah, he's not
he
sold
helps.
on that
He
term
helps
yet.
with the podcast. He helps with all your work, really.
He really does help with a little bit of everything. So.
Can we get a woof woof?
No. The good thing is we don't get as many as we could. So
I know.
fingers
He's
crossed.
actually kind of a quiet dog, which we love.
Yeah, we're into that. But he does make his little, sounds, his little old man
I wonder
sounds.
if the mic picked it up.
It sure did. I got headphones on. So that's Russell, and you'll be hearing more from him. You can also check out my Instagram feed if you want to see now. Photos of Natalie has now been shifted to photos of Natalie and photos of Russell. So you have to share the space with Russell.
My dude Russell too is
My dude Russell.
his
He's
own
got-
handle.
He's got his own special identity. And that, believe it or not, is all for this episode. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, Entertainment to Effect Change, the Hemophilia Alliance, as well as our presenting sponsor, Takeda, and our like segment sponsor, Genentech. Subscribe to the BloodStream podcast and the Ask the Expert podcast. I don't think Russell's going to subscribe. Oh, that is a big yawn. He's bored. The Ask the Expert podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us ratings, share our shows, and help spread the word. You can email us at, Russell, do you know the email address?
Woof woof.
Okay, mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com. You also find Bloodstream on Facebook, /BloodstreamMedia, and at BloodstreamInfo on Twitter and Instagram. Reminder to check, Russell, what should they check? That's right, the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on bloodstreammedia.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
And
this
you
is
are Russell.
He's just trying to eat the microphone.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. All right, Russell, we'll go outside. Bye, everybody.